What would you do if your own brother stood up at Thanksgiving dinner and announced to everyone in the room, "My little sister is nothing but a disappointment to this family. She'll never be welcome in my home"? Those words weren't whispered. They weren't part of a private argument. They were declared with full force at a table full of relatives over slices of turkey and mashed potatoes. That was the last time I saw my brother Thomas, until last week, when I walked into the rehearsal dinner for his vow renewal ceremony and his fiancée gasped audibly in front of Boston's most elite guests and curtsied. Not sarcastically, not mockingly. She looked me in the eye and said, "Your Honor. I didn't know you'd be here." And just like that, the room shifted. Eyes turned. Forks paused. Even Thomas, who hadn't looked me in the face in a year, went pale. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, this story might just hit home. Because I'm Madison Mitchell, and exactly 1 year after being labeled a family disgrace, I became the youngest federal judge in my district. But let me take you way back to where this all started. We grew up in a wealthy suburb just outside Boston. Picture sprawling colonial homes, manicured lawns, cocktail parties with live quartets, and neighbors who whispered behind cashmere scarves. The Mitchell name meant something here. My father, Robert Mitchell, was a third-generation investment banker. My mother, Elizabeth, ran every charity gala worth attending. To the outside world, we were a polished, flawless family. But inside our home, the cracks were deep and invisible. Thomas, 5 years older than me, was always the golden child. Even when we were little, he couldn't do wrong. He'd come home with a B+ on a math test, Dad would clap him on the back and take him out for ice cream. I'd bring home straight A's across the board. All I got was a half glance over the top of the evening paper and a distracted, "That's nice, Madison." I used to crave my father's praise, but slowly I realized it wasn't something I could earn. It was something that had already been handed to Thomas. At family gatherings, relatives would swarm Thomas, asking about his plans, his future, his internships, me. They'd compliment my dress, my hair. I was decoration. Not a legacy. I'll never forget being 9 years old, sneaking into my mother's closet and finding her college yearbook tucked behind her shoe boxes. She had been an English Lit major, graduated with honors. I remember flipping through her old photos and wondering what happened to that version of her. When I asked her why she never talked about her college days, she gently closed the book and said, "Some dreams just change." Later that night, I heard her whisper to my father, "Madison asks too many questions." He chuckled and replied, "Don't worry, she'll outgrow it." Spoiler alert, I didn't. By 12, I was hiding books about Ruth Bader Ginsburg under my mattress. By 13, I stood up at dinner and announced I wanted to be a lawyer. The silence was brutal. Then came the laughter. "Women don't do well in high-pressure careers, sweetheart," my father said with a tight smile. Thomas added with a smirk, "Besides, who would want to marry a lawyer?" There was a time back when I was little when Thomas had defended me. Once a neighborhood kid called me names at the park. Thomas had stepped in, stood tall, and said, "Hey, no one's mean to my sister, except me." Then ruffled my hair with that big brother grin. But that boy, the one who stood up for me, he disappeared, replaced by a mirror of our father, more polished, more prideful, more cruel. By high school, Thomas was leading the debate club only because our dad had been its president decades earlier. Meanwhile, I was winning actual statewide championships. But when I brought home the trophy, I still remember my dad muttering, "That's fine, but no one's hiring a wife based on her extracurriculars." Every win I earned felt invisible. Every step Thomas took was celebrated. At one point, my mother, who always hovered at the edge of disapproval and regret, came into my room after a particularly brutal dinner. She sat on the edge of my bed and whispered, "Your father just wants what's best for you." I looked at her and asked, "Did you want something more for yourself before you met him?" She didn't answer, just stood up and left. But I saw it, in her eyes, the ghost of who she used to be. Senior year of high school. That's when everything snapped. The college acceptance letters came in thick envelopes, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all part of the approved Mitchell list. And then, Berkeley, progressive, bold, thousands of miles from home, and with one of the best pre-law programs in the country. I still remember the dinner table that night. I placed my acceptance letter on the table and said calmly, "I've decided. I'm going to Berkeley." My father's crystal water glass struck the table so hard it cracked. "Absolutely not," he said, voice tight with fury. "No daughter of mine is going to that liberal cesspool." Across the table, Thomas, always the loyal echo, scoffed. "Why do you always have to be different, Madison?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I stood my ground. "Berkeley is where I'll become the lawyer you keep insisting I can't be," I told them. "I'm not trying to rebel. I'm choosing what's right for me." The ultimatum followed swiftly. If you walk away from Harvard, you walk away from this family's support. That night, I applied for student loans. 2 weeks later, I accepted Berkeley's offer, and I haven't lived under the Mitchell roof since. Moving across the country was terrifying. I left behind polished floors and cold silence for tiny dorm rooms and loud ideas. I roomed with Jasmine, first-generation college student from Detroit, who would become the sister I never had. We'd stay up until 2 a.m., debating constitutional law, laughing over ramen, dreaming of futures no one had scripted for us. It was exhilarating. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Thomas had started Harvard Business School, and he was struggling. My mother would whisper over strained holiday calls your father had to hire a tutor to help him pass. But at Thanksgiving, they still toasted his challenging curriculum while pretending my place on the dean's list didn't exist. So Madison, still doing that law thing. Thomas sneered during dessert like I was pursuing basket weaving. "Actually, I just got accepted into an honors research program." He smirked. "Well, isn't that cute?" They were experts at the slow suffocation of ambition. My mother changed the subject, something about Thomas's summer internship at the family firm. Of course. I didn't go home that summer. Instead, I interned at the Alameda County Courthouse under Judge Eleanor Washington. She was everything my family said a woman shouldn't be firm. Brilliant, unapologetically black and female and powerful. Over lunch one day, she told me, "Some people will never approve of your path. Make peace with that early." I wrote it in my journal that night and underlined it twice. Then came the engagement. Thomas and Rebecca, a match made in country club heaven. Rebecca had attended Wellesley, majored in art history, and now worked part-time in a gallery owned by a family friend. My mother called her perfect. The engagement party scheduled during my finals. When I explained I couldn't attend, my father didn't blink. "Your brother is continuing the Mitchell legacy. You're just playing revolutionary." That was his word for me now, revolutionary. Said like an insult. But to me it sounded like freedom. I graduated summa cum laude from Berkeley the following spring. My parents came, but only because Thomas's graduation from Harvard Business School was the next day. Guess which graduation photos ended up in the family frame collection, let's just say. They weren't mine. That summer, Thomas's wedding was a black tie Boston affair. I was a bridesmaid dressed in lavender silk I didn't choose, walking down an aisle I didn't believe in. The minister spoke about a woman's duty to support her husband's ambition. My mother dabbed tears. My father glowed with pride. "You could have this too," my mother whispered during the first dance. "There's still time to find a nice man and settle down." I booked a red-eye flight back to California the next morning and mailed my application to Columbia Law School from the airport. They didn't know it yet, but their disappointment of a daughter. She was about to be accepted into one of the top law schools in the country on merit, on scholarship. No Mitchell money, no Mitchell name, just Madison. Columbia Law was everything I had dreamed of and more. Fast-paced, ruthless, elite. I was surrounded by some of the brightest legal minds in the country. But I didn't feel intimidated. I felt ready. While Thomas and Rebecca were sending out holiday cards in front of fireplaces and trust-funded homes, I was elbow deep in casebooks working part-time at a women's legal advocacy center and winning my first mock trial championship. They didn't ask about it, not once. The only messages I received from home came through my mother's carefully polite emails. Rebecca's due in March, so exciting. Thomas was just named VP at your father's firm, he's doing so well. But when I sent them news that I'd made law review silence, I still remember the night I collapsed in my apartment. Final year, pneumonia, 104-degree fever, barely made it to the ER. My roommate Jasmine, bless her soul, called my parents out of desperation. My mother sent a bouquet of white lilies. My father, nothing. When I called days later just to say I was okay, he answered the phone with, "This is what happens when you push yourself too hard in unsuitable directions. Not, I'm glad you're all right. Not, we were worried. Just cold clinical dismissal. Like my body had failed a test I wasn't supposed to be taking in the first place." But I kept going. Because somewhere between that ER visit and final exams, I realized something important. I didn't need them to see me. I had become someone who could stand on her own. When I graduated top of my class, I received an offer for a clerkship under Judge Marilyn Samuels, a legal legend in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The news made waves in the legal community. It even made the local legal paper back in Boston. I sent my mother a quick text with the news. Her reply came 2 days later. "Congratulations, that's very impressive. I hope it won't be too stressful." And then Thomas just signed his first client portfolio, Different Worlds, different definitions of success. Still, I flew back to Boston to pack up my things. An unexpected package was waiting for me. Inside a small velvet box, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and a handwritten note from my mother. "These should have gone to you at graduation. I'm sorry I couldn't give them to you in person. I am proud of you, even if I don't say it enough." I sat on the floor for 10 minutes, earrings in my palm, trying not to cry. It was the first crack in the armor, the first time I realized maybe someone had been watching after all. Working with Judge Samuels was like being trained in a mental boot camp for justice. She didn't tolerate mediocrity, but she pushed me, believed in me, and one day during a performance review, she said something I'll never forget. "You don't just understand the law, Madison. You understand people. You have the mind and heart of a judge." No one in my family had ever said anything remotely like that. 3 years later, I was an assistant DA, handling the hardest cases: domestic violence, child abuse, assault. The cases broke my heart and remade it again. It was exhausting. It was relentless. It was purpose. And my reputation grew, quietly. Colleagues noticed. Defense attorneys respected me. Even some judges pulled me aside and said, "You've got something different. Keep going." Then the call came. Judge Raymond Patel was retiring, and someone had put my name forward as a potential nominee to fill his seat. At 33, unheard of, but not impossible. The nomination process was grueling. Every email, every court transcript, every opinion I'd ever written scrutinized. And through it all, I said nothing to my family, because I already knew what their response would be. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Madison. Let's not be dramatic." But then, the local Boston Legal News broke the story. Headline: youngest nominee for District Bench Madison Mitchell. 2 days later, my mother called. "Madison," she said quietly, "why didn't you tell us?" Her voice cracked slightly. "We found out from the Hendersons at their dinner party." I took a breath, because I didn't think you'd be interested. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She just paused and said, "Your father saw the article. He didn't say anything, but he kept it. I found it folded in his desk drawer. For a moment, I forgot how to speak." Then she added, "Thanksgiving is at the house this year. Thomas and Rebecca will be there with the boys." A pause. "We'd like you to come. And despite everything, despite the years of silence and the one Thanksgiving that broke everything," I said yes. Thanksgiving that year was a calculated risk. I had just been nominated to the district bench. The article in the Boston Legal Gazette was making its rounds and whispers were building, but I wasn't going back to flaunt anything. I was going back because for the first time in years my mother had asked me to. The Mitchell family home hadn't changed. Same towering columns, same cold marble entryway, same unnerving silence under layers of politeness. My mother greeted me with an awkward hug, tight and tentative. My father gave me a formal handshake as if I were a colleague, not his daughter. Thomas and Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later. Their sons, Robert and James, were dressed like mini bankers in matching plaid. Rebecca offered air kisses. Thomas gave me a cold nod. The early part of the evening was surface level. Weather, flights, recipes. My mother babbled nervously about the turkey brine. My father asked a question about gas prices. Thomas said nothing to me at all. Then came dinner. We sat at that long, glossy table under a chandelier I used to count crystals on as a child. The turkey was carved, Grace was said. Wine was poured. And then, inevitably, it came. My father cleared his throat. So, Madison, this judgeship, quite unusual for someone your age. Was that pride in his voice? Curiosity or just suspicion? Yes, I replied calmly. The nomination was unexpected, but I'm honored. He nodded slowly. Confirmation hearing, December 15th. That's when Thomas set down his wine glass hard. I'm sure it'll be interesting, he said, voice tight, to see if they confirm someone with so little real-world experience. The room stilled. My mother's fork hovered mid-air. Rebecca suddenly found her napkin very interesting. I kept my voice level. I've handled over 200 cases as an ADA, including high-profile prosecutions. I'd say that qualifies. Thomas scoffed. Playing lawyer for a few years hardly prepares you to be a judge. Some of us build real careers based on legacy and values. That was it. The mask slipped. The real tension boiled over. That's always been your problem, Madison. He continued, his tone rising. You think you're better than this family. You look down on us. While we've upheld the Mitchell legacy, you've been off performing. My mother whispered, Thomas, please. Even my father muttered, let's change the subject. But Thomas wasn't done. Years of resentment fueled each syllable. You abandoned this family. You rejected every opportunity handed to you on a silver platter, just to be a social justice warrior 3,000 miles away. I stayed silent. Let him rage. You know what's not fair, he snapped. Having to explain to clients why my sister doesn't work at the firm. Hearing people talk about your name in papers while you ignore your own family. Everyone was silent now. Even the kids had stopped fidgeting. Then came the line I'll never forget. My little sister is nothing but a disappointment to this family. She'll never be welcome in my home. The words fell like ice water. My mother gasped. Rebecca stared at her plate. My father's expression froze, but he said nothing. I placed my napkin beside my untouched plate and stood. Thank you for dinner, Mother. I think it's best if I leave now. No one followed me to the door. No one tried to stop me. Outside in the freezing Boston air, I sat in my rental car, shaking. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification email from Senator Harris's office. My confirmation hearing had been moved up. 2 weeks. I stared out at the Mitchell home for a moment, then turned the ignition. I wasn't coming back. The hearing was intense. Republican senators grilled me on my age, questioning whether someone barely out of law school could wield a gavel responsibly. Democratic senators highlighted my prosecution record and mentorship program. Senator Michaels asked bluntly, "Why should we believe you're qualified, Judge Mitchell?" I met his eyes and said, "Because justice doesn't require age. It requires clarity. I've seen the system from the inside. I've stood beside victims. I've made hard calls. My age gives me proximity to the problems. My experience gives me perspective." I spoke the way I had learned to speak calmly, with conviction, just like at that Thanksgiving dinner. Only now people listened. The vote came 13-9, confirmed. 2 weeks later, the full Senate voted. I became the youngest federal judge in my district, one of the youngest in the country. The media called it a generational shift. The New York Times ran a feature. Legal blogs dissected my opinions. Suddenly, Madison Mitchell wasn't just a disappointment. She was a symbol. I didn't want to go. After Thanksgiving's implosion and a lifetime of rejection, attending Thomas and Rebecca's vow renewal felt masochistic. But when my mother called voice-tentative hopeful and said, "I think it's time," and when Daniel, my partner, looked at me over dinner and said, "Maybe it's not about them anymore. Maybe it's about healing for you," I said yes. 2 weeks later, we landed in Boston. The invitation had read, "The Honorable Madison Mitchell and guest," a formality, but still the first time the Mitchell name had been linked to mine, with respect. The venue was a historic Boston hotel, the kind with oil paintings older than the country, and staff who spoke in hushed reverence. Daniel squeezed my hand as we stepped into the reception hall. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I will be." My mother saw us first. Her hug was less stiff than usual, lingering, almost warm. "Madison." "Daniel, it's lovely to meet you." Then came my father. Same formal posture, but something was different. "Madison," he said with a nod, then turned to Daniel. Robert Mitchell, a handshake, firm, no scoffs, no jabs, just quiet acknowledgement. We made it through introductions and social pleasantries with minimal awkwardness. Thomas and Rebecca were busy with the planner. We hadn't spoken yet. I watched from across the room. Thomas looked older, not tired but not smug either, a little more human. Their sons fidgeted in small suits. Rebecca moved with polished grace. Then it happened. Rebecca glanced across the room and saw me. Her face changed instantly. Surprise, confusion, then something else, recognition. She walked straight toward us, no hesitation. And when she reached us, surrounded by a circle of family, friends, and socialites, she did something I didn't expect. Something no one expected. She dipped slightly at the knees, a curtsy, and said loud enough for nearby conversations to pause, "Your Honor. I didn't know you'd be here." Everything froze. Aunt Patricia dropped her canapé. One of Thomas's groomsmen did a double take. Even Amanda, Rebecca's sister, looked stunned. From the corner of the room, Thomas turned, his face drained of color. Rebecca continued beaming with what seemed like genuine pride. "You handled the Westfield case, didn't you?" My sister raved about the pre-trial opinion, said it was the best written she'd ever read. I nodded, surprised. "Yes, that was me." "My sister's a public defender," she explained. "She said your ruling changed how the entire district handles juvenile detainment." At that moment, Thomas reached us. He looked between me and Rebecca, his expression unreadable. "Rebecca, you've met Madison." "Thomas, why didn't you tell me your sister was Judge Mitchell?" She turned to me. "I've been hearing about your work for months and never made the connection." Thomas swallowed. "I didn't realize you'd be interested." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Your mentorship program. Amanda says it's changed lives. One of her clients' daughters is headed to pre-law now because of your scholarship." I wasn't sure how to respond. These weren't empty compliments. Rebecca wasn't just making nice. She knew my work. She'd respected it maybe even before she knew my name. "Dinner is about to begin," Thomas said, shifting uncomfortably. "Shall we?" "Of course," Rebecca replied, then turned to me. "Judge Mitchell. I'd love to speak more later. Amanda would never forgive me if I didn't learn more about your juvenile justice initiatives." She walked off with grace. Thomas stood there, silent, wounded, proud, embarrassed. I couldn't tell. Daniel broke the tension. "Your wife seems lovely." He extended his hand. "Daniel Harrison." Thomas took it automatically. "Thomas Mitchell." Then turned to me. "I didn't know you'd bring someone." "Mom said it was fine," I replied, wary. He nodded. "No, it's good. You're not alone." There was something in his tone, a wobble. I didn't press. Not yet. We were seated at the same table for dinner. My parents, Thomas, Rebecca, Amanda, Daniel, and me. And it was Amanda who dominated the conversation. "Your pre-trial release decision was the most balanced I've ever seen," she said excitedly. You actually read the science behind trauma response. I blinked. Thank you. I try to be thorough. My mother smiled. My father listened. Really listened. Thomas. He grew quieter with every compliment. Rebecca, on the other hand, looked thoughtful, as if seeing me not the sister caricature, but the woman I'd become. Toward dessert, Thomas stood suddenly. Madison, could I speak with you? All eyes turned. I hesitated, then nodded. Daniel gave my hand a squeeze under the table. We stepped into a quiet hallway just off the dining room. Thomas closed the door, turned to me, and for the first time in years. He looked vulnerable. The door clicked shut behind us. The hallway was quiet, just us, distant laughter muffled by velvet curtains and polished oak. Thomas looked unsure, like a man standing at the edge of something he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I didn't know he began. Didn't know what I asked cautious. About your work. The impact. I thought when people talked about Judge Mitchell, it had to be someone else. He looked down, then back up. I've been jealous of you for years. The words hit like a slow echo. I blinked. Jealous of me. You built something. Earned it. Fought for it. He gave a weak laugh. I was handed everything and still managed to feel like a fraud. You did it alone. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. Because this version of Thomas, I'd never seen him before. Dad started molding me when I was 10, he said. Golf, business dinners, etiquette lessons. I thought if I became what he wanted, I'd matter more. And for a while, it worked. But when the business started faltering, he paused. I felt like a failure. Then you show up headlines, Senate hearings, the robe. I couldn't handle it. He looked me dead in the eye. What I said at Thanksgiving, it wasn't about you. It was about me. A long silence stretched between us. Then he added quietly, I'm sorry, Madison, for Thanksgiving. For years of acting like you didn't matter. You did. You do. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. As we rejoined the dinner, the air between us felt different. Not warm, but no longer sharp. Rebecca watched us closely. Later, she pulled me aside. I asked Thomas to write the invitation, she said quietly. He didn't want to, but I told him if he meant to change, he had to start somewhere. I looked at her surprised. She smiled. You were right about me. I wasn't just playing perfect society wife. I've started part-time at Amanda's office, taking night classes in public policy. I stared. She laughed, surprised a little. Your journey made me realize I was still waiting for permission to live fully. Watching you gave me courage. The next morning during the vow renewal, something unexpected happened. Just before the ceremony began, Rebecca approached me again. Madison. Our reader dropped out. Would you consider reading a passage about forgiveness? I looked at Thomas, who stood nearby, hands folded in front of him. He gave a small nod. So I stood at the podium and read aloud a passage about how love requires space for growth, for change, for second chances. I didn't look at anyone directly, but when I finished, I saw my mother wiping tears and my father nodding. Just once. Weeks passed, then months. My judicial seat was confirmed. I was elevated to the appellate court 9 months later. At the ceremony, my parents came. My father stood stiffly, but applauded. And Thomas. He pulled me into a hug afterward. You were always the one who made us uncomfortable because you didn't stay in line. Turns out, that's what made you unstoppable. Over time, shifts became steady. Thomas started night school public administration. He discovered he loved coaching his kids' teams more than closing financial deals. I don't think I'm meant to be in finance, he confessed over dinner once. I want to make a difference. My father, once incapable of respecting deviation, simply said, takes courage to change course. Then looking at me, some of us learn that sooner than others. Rebecca gave birth to a daughter that spring. They named her Sophia Madison Mitchell, and they asked me to be her godmother. My mother enrolled in a master's program in literature. After 35 years of being a wife and hostess, she finally became a student again. I sent her a first edition of Persuasion on her birthday. She called crying. "No one has acknowledged that version of me in decades," she whispered. My mentorship program expanded to 3 districts. We served 50 young women that year. One of them, Angela Rivera, told me, "My dad said law wasn't for girls, but you showed me it is." I looked at her and smiled. Build your own table, Angela, and make sure there's room for others. The work is hard. The courtroom still weighs heavy some days, but it's mine. And now I carry my family's name with meaning I created, not inherited. A few months ago, Thomas sent me a photo. His daughter, Sophia, wearing a toy judge robe from her brother's career day kit. The caption read, "Sophia says she wants to be like Aunt Madison when she grows up." Underneath, he added, "Setting the bar high from the start." I sat with that image for a long time, smiling. I was never the disappointment. I was the disruption. And sometimes that's what families need the most. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you, told you didn't belong, only to prove them wrong? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that success isn't about fitting in. It's about standing up even if you have to stand alone for a while. Thanks for listening to my story. I'm Judge Madison Mitchell, and I'm not waiting for anyone's approval anymore.